No mai hoki mai ki te rā tuatahi o te wānanga tuatoru or Crazy and Ambitious me Cody Land Summit. If you've just joined us, welcome. Or if you've been online for a while, welcome back to day one, session one of the Bi-Heritage Crazy and Ambitious 3 conference, which features also the Cody Lands Summit. This next session that we're about to have is woven around the empowering Kaitiakitanga and environmental stewardship outcome area in the science challenge. I'm going to hand straight over to our chair, the social researcher, Susanna Finlay-Smits. No mai anō, Susanna.
Kia ora, Andrea. Can I just remind everyone to please enter your questions for the speakers in the live Q&A icon at the bottom. So as Andrea said, our first presentations for this second half, I should say, of session 1 are from the Empowering Kaitiakitanga and Environmental Stewardship program of work. Now, this program notes that unless New Zealanders are inspired to act and work together for a common goal, the response to our biological heritage crisis will be disjointed, ad hoc, and potentially counterproductive. As such, the Empowering Kaitiakitanga and Environmental Stewardship team is aiming to understand the underlying values and drivers that lead some people to actively protect our biological heritage. They also want to understand feedbacks between people and the ecosystems in which they live. Our first speaker is Jo Ledington. With a background in ecology and wildlife management and having previously worked at DOC as a conservation officer, Jo is currently the Manager of Conservation and Restoration at Zealandia. Tēnā koe, Jo.
Kia ora, thank you very much. It's really lovely to be here to join you all today. As Susanna said, I'm the Manager for Conservation and Restoration at Zealandia, Te Māra, Tane, and today I want to talk to you about our flagship project, Kia Moriora Te Kaiwharawhara, or Sanctuary to Sea. Zealandia sits at the headwaters of the Kaiwharawhara. This catchment is a really important and unique one in Wellington City. It's the largest catchment we have, and it's the only remaining natural outlet to the harbour. There's a pass site at the estuary mouth, which has and the whole catchment has a mana whenua. And it's an urban catchment, so many threats and pressures. But with that urban comes the opportunities to connect individuals. We have a 100-year goal for transformation of the catchment. And we're really, really lucky to have 8 brilliant strategic partners and Te Tiriti partners working alongside us to focus across these 3 streams of work. So the catchment has some incredible values. We've got Zealandia, a 225 hectare predator-proof fence. We've got 13 species of fish, native fish, inanga spawning in the estuary, birds dispersing out, community groups, businesses, and a nearby university. And the challenges which are common across New Zealand, the same as what everyone is experiencing, including mana whenua that have been displaced and disconnected from this catchment. Our strategic group has been working on some key initiatives. These are current and recently completed. And as you can see, they're across all areas of the 3 streams of work. Now, I really want to focus today on our 2 current priorities for Kia Moriora Te Kaiwharawhara that Zealandia is focusing on. And that's growing our partnership with mana whenua. And one of the main ways we're doing this is through species reintroduction that are co-led by mana whenua and Zealandia. Our most recent one was a kakahi translocation freshwater mussel from some nearby iwi-managed lakes into Rotoromahanga in Zealandia. And what we're aiming to do is partner really differently than has been done in the past. We want to be excellent Te Tiriti partners. So we're constantly looking for ways to push ourselves and push our boundaries and innovate in this relationship space. So we've acknowledged that it's really important to build relationships with entities, but it's equally important to build relationships with individuals within those entities and support their aspirations to come to life. So, for example, a really good example of this is Therese McLeod, who is Taranaki whānui, was at a beach cleanup day and was just picking up plastic flowers from graves. And so this inspired her to launch the Plastic Free Urupā movement at her local urupa, and we're now supporting her to pull that across the city in the catchment, at the Kaiwharewhara catchment. So it's really important that we acknowledge that these individuals have different perspectives and values, and we see our place as working to give those individuals and local support and space to achieve those aspirations. In the recent Kākahi translocation that we did, where we honoured tikanga, maramataka and whakawhanatanga by incorporating karakia wai. We selected the dates for our translocation using maramataka. We had Kete Waikawa commissioned by the lovely Hikoikoi Weavers group, and we gave them the opportunity to be involved right through from weaving through to the release of Kākahi into the roto, as well as the collection. And what we've found is that it's an incredibly enriching experience for every single person involved. We've also got another couple of translocations coming up, the Common Bully and Poa Oteranga, which the Poa Oteranga, which is Daptylanthes taylori, is incredibly exciting, as that's a full cross-iwi-led translocation to both the council and Zealandia site. And our next big focus looking forward is every business restoring nature. So we have a working group made up of DOC, Centrepoint, Taranaki Whānui and ourselves to build businesses connection to our. So we see these businesses again as all being individuals who have their unique priorities and connection, and we just want to strengthen that, improve outcomes for the hour, the catchment and the businesses. So we're currently looking for research partners to explore how attitudes shift in individuals as they go through this journey. But it's a really exciting path forward that we can see. That's all today, but thank you for listening.
Kia ora, thank you, Jo. Our next speaker is Lynette McLeod. Lynette is an environmental psychologist whose work is focused on improving human behaviour change to achieve better outcomes for people and the environment. Tēnā koe, Lynette.
Kia ora. Tēnā katoa Kathryn. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, Jo, for your informative background talk to our project. My name's Lynette, and I'll be sharing the achievements of the project Empowering Environmental Stewardship in Kaitiakitanga today. Environmental stewardship refers to the philosophy or the ethic around protection, restoration, and sustainable use of natural resources for the benefit of our environment and society. But it also describes the actions that are required to achieve these goals. So our first step was to conduct a scoping review to understand more about this term. So we were looking at how is environmental stewardship operationalised in the literature and what are its key characteristics. So what are the actions and the outcomes? Who are the main actors and what factors are influencing their actions? And once those factors are known, how is action being mobilised? As you know, Kaitiakitanga has become a guiding principle in the bicultural policy between Maori and the Crown. So we were also interested in how environmental stewardship overlaps with Kaitiakitanga. As I've only got a short time today, I'll just give a quick overview of the results, but the full results will be in our paper, which is currently under review in +1. So our search resulted in 235 peer-reviewed articles. And I've put a graph up on the screen which shows the number of articles per year of publication. So our earliest publication for environmental stewardship was a book first published in 1949, and our earliest Kaitiakitanga reference was in 1978. But as you can see, it's really only been in the past 6 years that these terms have become more frequent in the literature. We found environmental stewardship categorised a multitude of different actions undertaken by a range of actors, individuals, groups and organisations, and addressed an array of issues that impacted biodiversity on the land and in the water. It's interesting to note that over a quarter of the literature was focused on private land managers, farmers and the like in rural areas. So from this review, we identified gaps for further research for our project. As Joe's highlighted, freshwater biodiversity is one of the important areas that needs research. And we identified that research in urban areas and on freshwater biodiversity was a gap. So empowering urban citizens to demand and enact environmental stewardship in Kaitiakitanga will help implement ongoing research in that area. Now, we know Kaitiakitanga involves much more than just stewardship actions. So it encompasses a deep relationship between humans, the spiritual realm, and the natural world. So our project will be looking at trying to understand how Kaitiakitanga is understood and expressed by Maori, because at the moment there doesn't seem to be a single perspective. And despite the many studies identifying behavioural factors that influence participation in stewardship actions, there was little in the way of evaluating the effectiveness of the interventions that have been designed to increase adoption and participation, or whether the actual desired outcomes were being achieved. So now I'll hand over to my colleague Don Hine, who will discuss how our project has been identifying the behaviour factors for engaging urban citizens in addressing freshwater diversity, and how we will use this information to develop and then evaluate the interventions.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. So I'll be following on from Lynette and Joe and focusing on our sort of behavior change part of this particular project. So the main aim of this second phase of our project involves applying principles and practices of behavior change to protect and improve biodiversity in urban waterways across the country. And our approach has three main steps. So in the first step, we're going to select high impact stewardship behaviors that can boost biodiversity outcomes in urban waterways. Second, we'll be identifying the primary drivers and barriers of these selected behaviors. And then finally, we'll be doing a number of field experiments where we will be co-developing behavior change interventions with communities to increase the adoption of the selected behaviors. So I'm just going to walk you through each of these steps in a bit more detail. So for our first step, selecting high impact behaviors, we started off by interviewing 15 freshwater experts about the most impactful things that people living in cities and towns could do to protect and improve the biodiversity in urban waterways. So we talked to environmental scientists and biodiversity advisors from regional and city councils, freshwater ecologists and aquatic scientists and engineers working at Crown Research Institutes, and also some university academics. So we tried to get a very broad range of experts to talk to. Our expert interviews generated a list of over 20 behaviors, and these are things that citizens can do to protect biodiversity in urban waterways and improve biodiversity in urban waterways. And so each of these 20 behaviors were rated in terms of their potential impact on biodiversity. So examples of the types of behaviors that came out in the interviews were sort of increasing the size of home gardens and lawns. The idea is that with surfaces that absorb water, there's less runoff that goes into the drains and can potentially pollute the waterways. Installing a water tank at home, planting trees near waterways, and reporting pollution sources to council. So those are just 4 examples of the over 20 behaviors that we had listed. And then the next thing we did is, and this is in process right now, is we're conducting a community survey where we're surveying over 500 residents, 100 Maori from cities and towns across New Zealand. And this survey closes next week. So we can't provide you the details, but sort of the next time we get to talk to you, we'll be able to get down and discuss our results in a bit more detail. And so for each of the behaviors on our expert list, each of the respondents for our survey were asked about their willingness to engage in the behaviors and the extent to which they already engage in these behaviors. This is something that we call penetration. All right, and so when we have all that information, we have information from experts and we also have information from the community. We use something that's called a behavior prioritization matrix. So this is something that's been developed by Doug Mackenzie Moore, who's a Canadian environmental psychologist. And the idea here is to identify which behaviors are likely to have the largest overall impact. And in order to determine that, you have to take three things into account. First, the expert ratings in terms of what is going to be the impact on biodiversity. And then also, we want to know whether or not people are actually willing to engage in these behaviors and the extent to which they already engage in these behaviors. And using this by behavior prioritization matrix, we can rank order the behaviors in terms of their overall impact. And basically what you're looking for here is sort of the sweet spot of behavior change where you have something that experts think are really, really impactful, things that the community are willing to do, and things that most people in the community are not already doing. So the idea is that even if you have a high impact behavior and people are willing to do it, but everyone's already doing it, that's not a good place to target your money. You want to focus on behaviors that people are not doing, that will have a high impact, and that people are willing to do. So just summary of what I just said, the key takeaway when you're for this first behavior selection part of the process is you want to identify high impact behaviors that most people are not already doing, most people are willing to do if they were given the opportunity, and are effective in addressing the environmental problem of interest, assuming that most people engaged in the behavior. All right, so once you've got a short list of behaviors that you think are worth targeting, the next thing to do is to drill down and identify the main drivers and barriers of those behaviors. So we're trying to understand here what leads people to engage or not engage in the behaviors that have been identified as impactful by our behavior prioritization matrix. To do this, we've been using a framework that was developed in health psychology by someone named Sue Michie out of the United Kingdom. And this framework involves identifying capability, opportunity, and motivation as a form for identifying the main drivers and barriers that influence behavior. So capability involves things like, do individuals have the relevant knowledge and skills and the physical capacity to engage in the target behavior? Opportunity focuses on, are the situational conditions present to support the behavior? Are there relevant laws and support structures in place to facilitate actions? Are there appropriate tools and technologies and training readily available in communities? And lastly, motivation. Are individuals sufficiently motivated to improve urban waterways? Are they aware of the threats? Do they possess the values, attitudes, and beliefs that inspire action? It's really important to understand that changing attitudes and increasing awareness are important when it comes to behavior change, but they do not always lead to behavior change. So they're important things that we have to take into account, but it's often the case that even if people have very positive attitudes towards behavior, they won't necessarily engage in that behavior unless the key barriers that may be preventing that behavior are removed. All right. So attitudes and values are important, but they're not the whole story when it comes to behavior change. So for the drivers and barriers section of our project, we'll be doing another large survey. This one will involve 2,000 residents with over 400 Maori respondents from cities and towns across the country. We hope to launch this survey in July or August of this year, and respondents will be asked a number of questions about their capability, opportunity, and motivation to engage in each of the behaviors that we identified from the first phase of the project. And then lastly, we want to actually have a real impact within the community, and we want to see whether or not we can help drive positive change within communities. And so the last phase of our project will involve co-developing interventions that are matched to the specific drivers and barriers that we have identified in the previous stage of the process. So we have an extensive collection of behavior change tools that are available to us, but it's really important to appreciate that not all tools are well suited for all situations. So you have to find out what your driver and barrier profile is for the communities that you want to work with. And then using that information, you want to work with communities to develop effective interventions. And so for this last phase of the project, this will be led by Zach Dorner and his team from the University of Waikato. And the interventions will be designed to leverage the drivers and reduce the barriers identified by our previous COM-B analysis. And it will involve a series of field experiments designed to support strong causal inferences about the impact of interventions on behavior change and ecological outcomes. So what we find is that when we review a lot of intervention studies that are done in this space, although the interventions look really compelling, often the evaluation phase isn't quite as strong as it could be. So what we're trying to do is use something that kind of resembles like a randomized control experiment that you would find in the pharmaceutical industry to sort of assess the effectiveness of vaccines and other drugs and apply those rigorous design principles to our behavior change interventions to evaluate whether or not they're effective in terms of changing behavior and ultimately the positive ecological outcomes that we would like to see. And we expect to have Zach and his team running these interventions throughout next year. All right, that's it for me. So thank you very much. I'm just the spokesperson for this group, but as you can see here, we are quite a large and diverse team of talented individuals. So thanks to everyone else who has helped us out to get this far.
Fantastic. Thank you, Don and Lynette. So we're now going to, as you see, bring our speakers from the Empowering Kaitiakitanga and Environmental Stewardship program back to the virtual stage. And along with them, we have Tasiano Milford, Zach Dorner, Kate Kitson, Pike, Stallman Brown, and Tash Tassel Matamua for a panel discussion and some Q&A. Again, please add your question to the live Q&A as they come to you. It's great to be able to put them to our speakers while we have them here. Just first question, you were just mentioning before, Don, that you were going to be co-developing interventions that are matched to the drivers and barriers. Who will you be co-developing those with?
Well, hopefully we'll be working with Joe, but we will also be using our networks to explore other areas of potential partnerships. So I think Jane and Pike have been most involved in sort of making those relationships, but ultimately we'll make the final decision after we identify which behaviors we want to target, just to ensure that we're targeting behaviors that are relevant to specific geographic areas.
Fantastic. And will you be also sort of drawing on kaupapa Māori approaches within those interventions?
Absolutely, yeah. We've got a very diverse team here. So one of the things that we definitely want to accomplish is to sort of take the strengths of both Western science and kaupapa Māori approaches and develop the strongest possible interventions that take community values into account.
Okay. I found it, while we wait for some questions to come through, I found it interesting that you, and great that you are looking at both, I suppose, individuals, both their willingness to engage in these behaviours and arguably their ability to engage in the behaviours. You've got them in different surveys. Was there an intention behind not asking the same people about both of those things?
I mean, it's theoretically possible that we might get some overlap in respondents, but in general, the process recommends that we keep these things separate. So in the first stage, we want to identify which behaviors to target, and then next we want to identify the drivers and barriers separately so that there's just no cross-contamination across this across the different phases of the study. Yeah.
Fantastic. Got any other questions? Andrea, do you have any questions for the team?
Yeah, I had a question for the team. I guess behaviours are linked, right? So, and you might have already said this, but I am curious about things like, the classic example is when someone puts the bin out on their street on the wrong night, and everyone thinks it's recycling night, and so they go and put their bin out as well. How do you deal with linked behaviours like that?
Does anyone want to take a stab at that, or would you like me to? Okay, no, I'm happy to answer. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, go ahead, Don, and then we can jump in after you.
Okay. Well, I think one thing that you want to do is once we get our list of behaviors finalized, we may want to look at sort of clusters of behaviors that sort of fit together in chains, and that will be sort of one way where we decide what we want to focus our interventions on. So it might be individual behaviors, or it might be a cluster of behaviors that together are impactful. In terms of sort of a bit of social, I think, which is what you were sort of implying, that sometimes people do the wrong thing and then everyone follows. That would hopefully come out in our barriers analysis, where we would sort of identify that, oh, no, one of the main drivers of people doing the wrong thing when it comes to this is that they're actually just following the behavior of others who they assume know what they're doing. So that can involve sort of more broad community education, or it can involve providing targeted information, reminding people exactly what the right thing to do and common sort of misunderstandings and poor behaviors that others engage in, and just so that people are more aware and alert to these other factors.
Great. We have some questions in the chat now. So first of it is down here. Do you think that, sorry, it's jumping around as the new ones are coming in. Do you think that Kaitiakitanga could be understood as a narrative lead approach to interventions? And are there other narrative approaches that you've been investigating as a team?
Well, yes, the answer to the first question is yes, and that's what we'll be looking at from July this year. We've got 2 master's students who are going to come on board, both Māori, and investigate understandings of Kaitiakitanga, but that are place-based. So in that sense, they will be, and at this stage, they're still refining exactly what they're going to be doing, but as far as we've gotten in terms of that refinement, they will be taking narrative approaches. So sitting down and actually talking with what we would consider, and from a Te Ao Māori perspective, place-based experts, so people who engage with freshwater and have over time, and place-based, it might be iwi, hapu, or it might be just local community sort of groups that are Māori specific. So that's sort of our narrative approach will be these 2 students taking the year to investigate what Kaitiakitanga, if it's relevant, first of all, for Māori as a term, and if not, what other term might be useful, and then how does it play out? What does that look like in terms of behaviours? And that will then feed into the more quantitative approaches.
Okay, I've got another question here. Wondering, how do drivers and barriers to action differ here in Aotearoa in comparison to internationally?
All right, I'll take that. We don't necessarily know. So I would expect that there has been some community-based social marketing work done in Canada and other parts of the world. And it's only once we do our research here will we be able to sort of compare what the key similarities and differences actually are. Yeah.
Fantastic. There's a question here harking back to Biosecurity 2025 and saying that that program stated that we'd have 5 million biosecurity officers, which indicates a behavioural change. So just wondering if you've reviewed any of the research from that program and whether you have any comments on your opinions of why we don't currently have that 5 million biosecurity officers.
Lynette, did anything come up in our review? Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, sort of that's something that's an institutional behaviour change, which we only looked at peer-reviewed literature, so that tended not to be in the peer-reviewed literature that we came across.
Okay.
But it is an interesting question, and the same types of principles that are applied to behavior change in communities can also be applied to institutions. So it's a really generalizable strategy. So we haven't looked at it, but it is something that could be looked at and analyzed using methods that are similar to the one that we're applying to this project.
Okay, another question here about whether you think government policies and funding can aid with removing the barriers. I'm wondering about the relationship between communities and how this might impact behaviour change over time.
I'll start with the first one. I certainly hope so. I'm hoping that we can identify these levers that can be actioned in order to reduce those barriers. And those levers could very well be informational, in which case no additional government funding is necessary. But it could also be that there simply isn't the means in place, in which case maybe people need tools or shovels or transportation, in which case there would be a very clear role for government in order to support these outcomes.
Fantastic. And another question. Oh, sorry. Yes, Don, you just want to add to that?
Yeah, one of the ongoing debates in the behavior change literature is some people feel, and I think quite rightly, that too much of the responsibility is being put on individual citizens, and sort of corporations and government aren't doing their part. So I think it's really important to understand the role of policy and also sort of well, free market capitalism and how that sort of drives often the wrong types of behavior. And we can sort of develop interventions that focus specifically on individuals, but at the same time, I think it's equally important to sort of identify some of these structural barriers and drivers that drive people to engage in sort of non-sustainable behaviors. So.
Can I just add to that too? I totally agree with Don, and I think at least from an Indigenous perspective, there really needs to be, I think, a deeper understanding of some of those structural and systemic barriers that prevent behaviour at the individual and also community level for Māori. Not only prevent, but even maybe disempower Māori. So I think also, and I guess we're hoping that maybe some of that will come out through our master's students engaging in that more narrative approach, so that they get a lot more depth of information around how those things can impact not necessarily willingness, but actual ability for behaviour change or behaviour in general.
Thank you. This is one last question currently in the chat, which is for you, Don, asking if you could please talk a bit more about how barriers to action can be identified.
Right. Okay. So we use what's called a COMBI framework, and that just provides us with a broad overview of the main types of barriers that we should be focusing on. So capability, opportunity, and motivation. And within each of those categories, there could be potentially, dozens of specific barriers that fall within each of those categories. So we attempt through our discussions with both experts and community members to identify what are the main drivers and barriers in each of those three categories. And then we develop a survey that we send out more broadly to sort of validate the extent to which each of those barriers and drivers are influential in terms of influencing behavior. So it's a combination of sort of a qualitative and quantitative approaches. It's mixed methods, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we are at the end of our time, unfortunately. So thank you all for your presentations and your input this morning. And I will hand back to Andrea, who I believe is introducing our next session on Ngā Pika Rere. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, kia ora koutou, no mai anō. I am having some internet issues and we have planned for that. So if we hand back to Susanna, don't be silly. I'd now like to introduce 4 wonderful early career researchers for the Ngā Pika Rere session: Rayne, Symon Palmer, Helen Warburton and Kathryn McRae. The reel for around Ngā Pika Rere really brings us a vision of our brilliant next generation researchers taking flight. Aisling is a research fellow studying kindness and science with the University of Otago's Centre for Sustainability and Te Pūnaha Matatini. She first joined BioHeritage for a PhD on enhancing mahinga kai outcomes for kekiwai, that's freshwater koura or crayfish, in partnership with kaitahu, whānau and primary industry. Symon is of Ngāi Te Rangi descent. He's a researcher based at Te Kawa a Maui School of Māori Studies at Te Herenga Waka, University of Wellington, and he works on novel tools and strategies. Helen is a freshwater ecologist based at the University of Canterbury. She works on the structure and dynamics of freshwater communities, and she's the BioHeritage resident scientist, Mātanga Pūtaiao for BioHeritage. And finally, last but not least, Kathryn is a senior scientist in the animal genomics team at AgResearch. I'd love to hand over to all of you now for the next presentation. Kia ora.
Thank you, Andrea. Kia ora. Today we're going to give you an update on Pika Rere, our early career po. I'm going to give you a brief overview of our history. Helen and Aisling will give you an update on our survey results, including our social network analysis, and Symon's going to give you an overview of our plans going forward. Firstly, I want to just introduce once again myself and my co-leads. I'm Kathryn McRae. I'm a geneticist at AgResearch. Helen Warburton's a freshwater ecologist at the University of Canterbury, and together we have co-led Ngā Pika Rere since its inception. Recently, we've had 2 new co-leads join the team. Rayne is a research fellow at the University of Otago and Te Pūnaha Matatini, and Symon Palmer is a research associate at Victoria University, Wellington. So just to give you a brief background on the history of Ngā Pika Rere, in June 2019, an early career scoping group was created to help enable early careers to develop their skills and empower their voices in Tranche 2. And I just wanted to point out the deliberate use of early career rather than early career researcher, as that group was diverse and wasn't just limited to academic pathways. The recommendations from this group during the scoping process was firstly to showcase clear and diverse career pathways, which did include but wasn't limited to academia. Secondly, help build leadership capability in a collaborative system. Thirdly, drive excellent mentorship and support. And finally, offer networking opportunities that aren't afforded in an individual's organisation alone. So from this, Ngā Pika Rere, the early career po, was hatched. Now I'm going to pass on to Helen, who will talk about the survey results.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Helen and I'm very briefly going to talk about a survey that Ngā Pika Rere ran in November 2021. Before talking more about the survey, I want to give a massive shout out and acknowledgement to Susanna Finley-Smits, who has also been an integral part of the team helping us with this work, and our wonderful chair for the session this morning. So the main aims of this survey were to understand the impacts, whether it be good or bad, that an early career individual gets from working within the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge, and whether or not that was different from those more established in their careers. And that's tackled by the first question on the screen. And then secondly, the survey, we wanted to understand the impacts that involving early career participants has on the challenge as a whole, and that was tackled by the second question. So the survey was filled out by anyone working within bioheritage, and respondents identified themselves as part of the survey as either early career or mid-career to senior career. And based on that, filled out different parts of the survey is indicated in the coloured text above the boxes, which I realise on some of your screens will be miniature. So in addition to those first two questions, which I am going to focus on a little bit in the next two slides, we also asked our ECs what support Ngā Pikarere could offer and would be of most use. And Symon is going to talk about that at the end of this presentation. And we also asked all respondents to tell us something about their networks, which Aisling is going to talk to us about after me. And this is just a quickly plug. The results that I'm talking about today are from around 70 respondents, which was a roughly 50-50 split between ECs and mid to senior career respondents. And we're planning on running a version of the survey again this year and next year. And I would really encourage all of you and all your teams working within bioheritage to please fill this out when it comes your way. Okay, so for the next two slides, I'm going to focus on these first two questions. Kathryn, can you switch the slides? Yeah, awesome. So firstly, looking at the impact of being involved in the challenge, there was no significant differences between the early and mid to senior career respondents. So the perceived impacts of being involved in the challenge were the same regardless of career stage. Today, I'm on the right side of the screen. I am just going to briefly share with you the benefits of being involved in the challenge. And the reason I say benefits, so the percentages shown on the right of your screen are the percentage of respondents that rated each of these items with a 4 or a 5 on a 5-point scale. In other words, were positive respondents. So the big benefits of being involved in the challenge were collaborative and networking opportunities, exposure to Te Ao Māori and Mātauranga Māori perspectives, exposure to other disciplines, and the ability to express Te Ao Māori and Mātauranga Māori perspectives. And now if we have a look at the next question in the survey that I'm going to focus on. So how did mid to senior career respondents answer the question, what do you perceive the impact of including EC individuals in the challenge on? Almost all of the responses were overwhelmingly positive. So there is really great evidence that involving ECs is beneficial. So the lowest response, which was mostly neutral responses and not negative, was the, not surprisingly, slightly increased admin work required when an EC is involved, but the biggest benefits being fresh ideas and perspectives that early career participants bring. So a great reason to keep including and supporting early career participants within the challenge. So as I said, this is just a quick taster of the data from our survey, and please watch this space. A bunch more interesting results and stories from this survey are coming out over the next few months. And now I'm going to hand over to Aisling, who's going to talk briefly about the social network data that was collected as part of this survey.
Kia ora, Helen. Kia ora koutou. Networks are a great way to visualize complex systems. Social network analysis, or SNA, is a way of using networks to explore relationships among different actors, such as the people, communities, and organizations that make up a national science challenge like bioheritage. All of these actors can be represented in a network as nodes. We can draw connections between nodes depending on whether or not they interact. In a network, these connections are referred to as edges. We can also add in information about the actors or their relationships to begin exploring different patterns. For example, all of these nodes are represented by a different color, which could mean that they belong to different communities, work in different disciplines, and so on. In our survey, we asked respondents to provide the names of up to 15 people that they interact with. We then visualized this in the software Gephi and layered in other data, including early career status. In a Ngā Pikarere context, one question that we're interested in is how well early career people are connected across the challenge. And ECs in green do appear to be well distributed throughout our network and evenly connected with other early careers and non-ECs. But the majority of these relationships are with the light grey nodes, which represent folk who were named by respondents but didn't respond to the survey themselves, and may or may not be part of bioheritage or early in their careers. Although encouraging, given the limitations of SNA and of our data, we can't say anything conclusive yet. But as an exploratory tool, this gives us an idea of where we could dig further with our stats, for example, around intersections of career stage, ethnicity and gender, and what questions we should ask in future surveys, and ultimately how we might grow relationships between different communities. And speaking of future opportunities, I will now pass the mic on to Symon.
Kia ora e hoa, and thanks to the team so far. So bringing together all of that work, the scoping group and survey findings, we've identified 3 key areas to move forward in. The first is building community, and that will come through professional development opportunities for our ECs. This will include online seminars and topics that ECs identified as of interest through the survey results. Already mentioned as an interest in mātauranga and how that works in the RSNI system, but also things like administrative skills, like budgeting and reporting to funders, things that university didn't always cover. So we really look forward to promoting these to our ECs soon. Including this is the Slack channel and email chains. We'll get to spam all of our membership about these awesome opportunities coming up. And building evidence, we're going to continue the survey, repeating this year and next, developing a baseline of information of ECs as already reported, and hoping to influence the space with these findings. We will be publishing these findings as well. Finally, building awareness. We are in a fortunate position to be able to have communication with leadership within bioheritage. So having those channels open for dialogue and also influencing CRIs and universities where we are based. So we look forward to highlighting these opportunities and concerns for Ngāi Rere membership and helping to develop the membership and bioheritage legacy. Moving to the final slide. So if you're keen to get involved or learn more, particularly if you identify as an EC within the bioheritage, please get in touch. We have our networking lunch shortly, which hopefully you will have got an invite to. And we encourage you to join our Slack channel and flick me an email if you have any questions or thoughts. Kia ora.
Okay, kia ora, Symon and the team. Thank you very much to all of the Ngāi Rere team. Unfortunately, we are out of time. If you do have questions, though, I'd encourage you in the lunch break to drop into the networking function for early career participants. That's starting right now. So if you return to the program timeline or you can access it from your touchpoint device screen. Feel free to go stretch your legs, grab a bite, something to eat, maybe something to drink, have a bio break for the next hour or so. Coming up next, we've got a fantastic session that's going to be interweaving human health and plant health, focusing on the oranga and mobilising for action themes in the Bioheritage Challenge and Ngā Rākau Takitaki, the SIF investment for plant pathogens. So we'll see you all back online here at 1 o'clock. I'm going to hand now to Matua Kevin Prime to close our session today with a karakia.
Kei nei tātou. Kei nei tātou. I te rau ai te atua kaharawa, i te atua oratuni. E tuko tanu mātou tēnei reo whakawheta ko moi me tiki a koe pā, o ngā tini manaakitanga i uhia mai e koe kuringia mātou roto i tēnei hononga i rungi te purangi. Mai te timitanga i te ata nei taino ki tēnei haora hakamutunga. Ko tēnei tonu te whakawheta i te whakamoimiti tō ingoa tapu te whakōkea te tekori ki a koe pā. E te ino te ki a koe ki a manaki tonu te koe tēnei o mātou e whakatutu ki anu ngā kōrero i puta kei te rānei ki a puta kene pai ngāno mo te tai ao. Mana akitiano ki tēnei o mātou wēna ki te whakatā me te kai hoki ki a tikai mo te hononga te i nei. Ko e ni tonu ka ngai noi ki a koe pā mau ne whakamana mai. I runga nei te ingoa tāutama, te kai whakaora koe ukaraichi. Āmene. Kia ora tātou.